Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. On May the 27th, Barack Obama will become the first sitting U.S. president to make an official visit to Hiroshima, Japan, site of the first attack using an atomic bomb. The White House characterizes the visit as a step that looks forward to a world free of nuclear weapons, but not an apology for their role in ending the Second World War. So what purpose does the visit serve for both victims of the bombing and for the American and Japanese governments today? To discuss these questions and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow of the China Institute of International Studies, and Anna Tangen, author and commentator. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Turning heads. Washington announced that President Barack Obama will visit Hiroshima with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on May 27th, the first visit by a sitting U.S. president to the site.
We warmly welcome President Obama's decision to visit Hiroshima. Many people were sadly victims of the atomic bomb that was dropped on the city more than 70 years ago. I hope that this visit will be an opportunity for Japan and the U.S. to remember all these victims together.
However, the White House went out of its way to stress that Mr. Obama has no plans to apologize for the world's first nuclear bombing.
The president intends to visit to send a much more forward-looking signal about his ambition for realizing the goal of a planet without nuclear weapons.
The Hiroshima bombing on August 6, 1945, killed around 140,000 people. Another atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki 3 days later. This move was credited with ending World War II. However, a scarred generation of Japanese people have a different opinion on Obama's coming visit.
We are not expecting a verbal apology, but I would like for him to firmly clarify his intentions regarding eliminating nuclear weapons. To me, that would be a true form of an apology.
If he is to visit, of course everyone wants to hear an apology.
Obama's historic visit can be interpreted many ways, but most can agree that the destruction caused by atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 71 years ago points to the need for a nuclear-free world.
Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Why do you think President Obama has agreed to visit Hiroshima? Everybody knows that this is the site of the first use of atomic bombing, opening the Pandora box of nuclear deterrence. What do you think?
Well, first of all, this visit is based on the political consideration in Washington, D.C. Everyone knows Japanese has been a long time trying to persuade the U.S. president to visit the site of a nuclear bomb for decades. But finally, U.S. accepted with different purposes. Japanese, of course, want to make use of this visit for apology gesture, but U.S. has a different consideration. Instead of the apology, neither for the so-called step forward you mentioned towards a nuclear-free world, but for strengthening U.S.-Japan alliance under the current situation. So that is the major driving force for Obama to visit the site.
Well, Mr. Yang actually has suggested that it's a political compromise that Washington has made to strengthen the military alliance against China in Northeast Asia.
Well, I see it a little bit less so in that thing. So I think you have to look at Obama and his desire to create this legacy. In 2009, in the early part of it, he made a speech that the U.S., as the only nation who has used nuclear weapons, has the moral imperative to act to make sure of it. Now, he made this a center point of his piece. 6 months after he gave that speech, he was awarded a Nobel Prize for Peace. And it was in their deliberations and their statement, they made reference to this and his desire to do that. Now, looking 7 years forward, the rhetoric and the reality does not match. He has been talking about nuclear-free and everything like that, but in actuality, he started the Cold War 2.0 with the funding $341.7 billion that are going to go into making sure that new forms of missiles, submarines, and aircraft can deliver nuclear bombs around the world. He traded this for the START program that he negotiated with Congress that said that there would be a 28% reduction in the number of warheads that can be used, but none of them were required to be destroyed. So a lot of people are looking at this as, once again, empty rhetoric following an inability to make sure that what he started with is actually done. On the Japanese side, I think there's another thing, and I see this as far more insidious. You have two different points of view. I think the people who suffered on this would like to hear less words and more action. They'll be calling for a 50% reduction in nuclear arms around the world. The Japanese government, I think they see this as a way of saying, well, look, the U.S. is not apologizing for what happened in the Second World War. Why should we? We should just move on, all right? Let sleeping dogs lie and just put this completely behind us. This would very much bolster Shinzo Abe's attempt to make sure that the history never has to be revisited, that he never has to revise his history books, which he's teaching young Japanese people that things like the massacre of Nanjing was in fact just some sort of police action that the Japanese were taking to save Chinese lives.
Let's come back to examine the issue of apology. Does Japan have any legitimate reason to demand an apology when Tokyo has repeatedly emphasized there's no longer any reason to apologize to victims in Northeast Asia, in particular, who suffer so much the war atrocities of the Japanese soldiers in the Second World War?
Well, I would say by this way, under the current situation, based on the existing international order, Japanese has no legitimacy to require an official apology for the A-bomb dropped by the United States. That was designed to ending the war earlier, save more lives, although they destroyed a lot of lives in Japan, unfortunately. Especially under the current Japanese political trend to deny the whole history of their invasion war. So it's unthinkable that international community can provide a so-called apology for the A-bomb on Japan.
And almost all of the decision makers who experienced the moment of using the A-bombs agreed that it's time to use this lethal weapon, except for Stinson, who is the Minister of Army. He disagreed somehow because of a fear of responsibility. What do you think of the this consensus building process in those years?
Well, the consensus building process has always been used. I mean, we see the United States president as all powerful. The fact is he sits down with his joint chiefs of staff and they map out things. He will set a direction. They will put out what they think is the things. Now, the fact is it was the Army and the Joint Chiefs who said distinctly, as if you go forward with a land war, how many people, how many civilians will die? How many of our soldiers will die? Right? What will the devastating effect be on the economy and territories of Japan? Given what we knew then with this island-to-island fighting, remember, we killed hundreds of thousands. Literally just a few would even surrender. They died to the last man. So the very, very important issue was calculating what the suffering was going to be, and I think this kind of consensus thing exists in almost all governments, except maybe Putin.
And what do you think of the feelings of the family of the pilot, who was the only one who participated in the dropping of the 2 A-bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima? According to a media report by Washington Post, this guy, who is called Charles Savani, said in a 1995 interview that when he saw so many young American guys were killed in the war, it's absolutely a right decision by President Truman to use the A-bomb. Did he represent the will of the younger generation there? What do you think of the response from the young? Now these days, young people seem to forget very quickly. Memories are start to recede very quickly about the atrocities in the war.
Well, the Euro knowledge among at least Asian people was and is, it was necessary to conduct such A-bomb on Japan because of various regions he mentioned. But the key question about this issue lies in who should be responsible for that war, rather than an individual action in the war. That's the key question. whenever we talk about a bomb incident or the other incident, we should not ignore the whole course of the aggression war launched by Japan. We should not ignore the sufferers and the lost Asian people got triggered by Japan. So that is the root. That is the basic root for all the questions, individual questions.
I just want to add something. I really see Abe and Obama in a Machiavellian kind of pact. First off, Abe knows that Obama is not going there to apologize. So he's only brought the president there, but there will be no significant breakthrough on top of that. And I think, as I said so before, that this is an effort to just say, look, if the U.S. won't apologize for whatever happened there, why should we? History is finished. We should just move on. And I think this is very much in his idea to get rid of this pacifist constitution. He will turn to the Japanese people and use this. From Obama's side, on the domestic politics side, he cannot and has no inclination to apologize for something that, as you pointed out, was a necessary act in a horrible war.
Is there legitimate suffering being used as a basis for a more general claim of victimhood, or as a way to continue to deflect blame for the policies and practices of Japan's wartime government?
Well, I would think it would be the latter. I mean, Shinzo Abe has made no secret of this fact that he wants to rewrite history and to minimize Japan's role. He will not apologize in any kind of meaningful way. He's backtracked on a number of the apologies that have been made in the past. And this is not just about China. We're talking about all of the nations that suffered. Philippines, Korea's, Bhutan, all of these areas that were there. So this is a region specific. The Japanese were aggressors. Now, as terrible as it was, the fact is that when Hiroshima was bombed and then Nagasaki 3 days later, over 250,000 people perished eventually within the year. But 6 days after that, the Japanese agreed to an unconditional surrender. Part of this was not just this issue of bringing the Japanese to heel. I think part of the timing, took place 10 days after the Potsdam Agreement in Brandenburg, Germany. I think that's when the U.S. notified its fellow partners in the war that they intended to drop this bomb. I think part of it was, in fact, aimed at Russia, who was rapidly advancing militarily along its borders, and I think the U.S. was concerned about what would happen there.
With regard to the issue of consolidating the base of a military alliance in Northeast Asia targeting the PRC, what you say reminds me of an interview that I did with a renowned American scholar of Japanese studies last year. He said most in the policymaking circle in the DC would take the issue of comfort women differently from the Yasukuni Shrine, which is taken very seriously by China because of the war atrocities and the Class A war criminals who are still shrined there. Now, what do you think of the alleged effort by the US government to divide and rule? I mean, it means South Korea is, after all, a close ally of the US. It's a legacy of the Cold War, by the way. China is not. So to restrict the influence of China in this region, South Korea needs to be treated nicely, using the allegation that comfort women have seriously violated human rights to show the American sympathy with their South Korean friends.
I think the so-called double standards, say U.S. choose both of the historical controversial issues in different way and different attitudes, stem from their way of thinking by Cold War. For the comfort women, U.S. desperately want to the solution between Japanese and the South Koreans so that they can form both of their allies into one, so build up those called parallel bilateral into the trilateral cooperation in security. That's their strategic purpose. Regarding to the shrine issue, that's more concerned by Chinese. I don't think U.S. has the same concerns between Chinese and Japanese. To the contrary, U.S. like to see some degree of tensions between Japan and China so that U.S. can manipulate between the two powers in this region. That different strategic consideration formed American different policies on this two historical issues. But in fact, it cannot be completely separated because both Chinese and the Korean people hate to see the Japanese right-wing people again and again visit the shrine, not only Chinese but also the Korean people, taking the conflict women. In fact, Chinese women suffer more than Korean women during wartime about the conflict women crimes.
Yet no such accusations have ever been made by the U.S. to my knowledge, condemning the Japanese violation of human rights with regard to the abuse of Chinese women during the wartime. But you are watching dialogue with Mr. Yang Xiyu and Mr. Anna Tangen. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. After the devastating defeat of Germany in the Second World War, Germany made great progress in rehabilitating its thinking, taking responsibility for its past and renouncing it through legislation. It has therefore become a pillar of the new, more integrated and cooperative Europe. Why has Europe been successful in overcoming the antitheses that came together during the war, while Asia continues to have ongoing unresolved tensions from this era?
Well, I mean, a lot of people will point to the fact that the emperor was not tried as a war criminal, that in essence the unconditional surrender left in place much of the existing government. If you start looking, the 23 major people were convicted on the war crimes. You compare that to Nuremberg, and the atrocities committed by the Japanese were every inch as serious as what was committed in Europe itself. When you start looking at the war camps, at comfort women, at the use of wartime slaves, literally to work in the mines until they died, the treatment of prisoners of war, American, Chinese, etc., the use of brutal tactics of going into villages, selecting somebody at random and shooting them as a way of trying to repress any kind of aggression towards their rule.
Of course, the father of the current Japanese emperor was held responsible for launching the war, whatever the excuses. But don't you think there isn't actually a monolithic single voice coming out of Japan with regard to visit to Yasukuni Shrine? The emperor refuses to go there, but many Japanese cabinets and prime ministers choose to go there. By the way, the emperor was installed there against the backdrop of the Korean War. So many of the POWs were used by the Japanese, by Americans, as a bulwark against what they call the communist domino reactions in the wake of the Second World War. What do you make of the American allegation?
Well, I think, firstly, the emperor of Japan, the existing emperor of Japan, in my observation, take right position towards the shrine visit than the more correct position than the right-wing politicians. Look, it is the politicians rather than the emperor who pay visit annually to the shrine that provoke a lot of Asian angries against this movement. And for the United States, it take a quite a mixed gesture and a position that indirectly encourage, especially in recent years, encourage the Japanese right-wing politicians to do more aggressively in the historical issues, not only the shrine issue, but also the other issues. But fundamentally, U.S. does share the same position with most of the Asian people, including Chinese people, about their aggression war history.
Now, Anna, Japan wants to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council in the next round of UN reform. However, unlike Germans who deeply, apologized for their war atrocities, therefore Japan could not be accepted wholeheartedly by its two most important neighbors, China and South Korea. Therefore, what do you think of their dream to be a permanent member and to be integrated into this region?
It doesn't hold with facts. As I said, until they come to terms with what happened, they cannot move past it. And this is what you continue to see, is this kind of going back, oh, no, we weren't the perpetrators, we were the victim. And this is really a story. Understand what the Yakushuni Shrine situation is. These war criminals that were convicted and hung were not buried there originally. They were moved by Japanese politicians into the shrine so that they could use it as an excuse, all right, to go there and honor these particular people. This was contrived. And this is why the emperor, after he found out about this, said, I refuse to go to the shrine. Prior to that, he had gone every year to make offerings for those, it was for veterans, all right, the people who died in the war, who were fighting at the behest of people in charge. Moving those people there and making this controversy is exactly the kind of victimhood type of situation that Japan has been perpetuating. From the US side, it is not monolithic either. There are those in politics who try to use this, as you say, for a dual purpose, and there are the others who acknowledge that Japan has not taken responsibility.
I wonder if you still remember what Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said on August the 14th, one day before the day of surrender last year. At the very beginning, the first few paragraphs, he said what the Japanese tried to do in Asia at the beginning of the war here in the Asia theater was to liberate Asia from the tyranny of Western colonialists. There is always a die-hard ultra-right movement or political force in Japan who not only urges the withdrawal of American troops from Okinawa, but also point their fingers in a blame game to the US, who still occupies, allegedly, the Japanese territory, who is held responsible for intervening with the formulation of a Japanese foreign policy, or even their defense policy, to say nothing of their arms sales to the world market. What do you think of the Japanese anger?
Yeah, I really share the observation you mentioned. In fact, whenever we talk about the right-wing movement or trend in Japan, we need to pay special attention to the parallel trend of the nationalism, the rising nationalism in Japan. It is the US, not China, occupy Japan. It is the US, not China, dropped a bomb on Japanese people. And although the current tension are in China and Japan because of the island disputes and some other things, fundamentally, the so-called normal state of Japan, that is their dream, that is the goal, the main obstacle come from US rather than from China. So on the surface, tensions between China and Japan is the most urgent thing. But gradually, in long term, I think the contradictions and the differences between Japan and the US regarding to the normal state, independence, or nationalism, many things, more important things, will emerge in the US-Japan relationship.
I'm not going to disagree with that entirely, but I would say, add that the Second World War was ended by this action, and it was necessary. And China's history would be fundamentally different if Russia had in fact come through China and into North Korea, and the map of the world would be significantly different, and maybe not in ways that would be very positive. So you have to give them us our due in the sense that we were willing to make a decision, no matter how terrible it was, to make sure that fewer lives were lost. So from that perspective, you can't deny that. You can't just say, well, the U.S. should apologize, or there's something there. What we did, and Japan agreed to a unconditional surrender. They said, okay, we will give up any ability or legal ability to go and fight a foreign war of aggression. And this is very, very important, and it has kept, I think, Asia very safe for a while. So at this point, looking back on the past is not necessarily things. I think it's the real issue here is Japan's own xenophobia on one side and their inability to reconcile truth with history.
What do you think of the issues that are of greater importance on the agenda for the world leaders? And do you think G7 is likely to catch up and replace G20 summit meeting that started to assume leadership in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008?
Well, during the past few years, it was declining of G7 and the rising of G20 since 2008. Now it is Japan that want to revitalize G7, at least at the same level of G20, But in fact, it's impossible because G7 represent the world economy less and less. Dislike the,
Look, this is controversial, I'm afraid, Xu Yu. In recent years, emerging markets start to have more jitters than steady economic growth because of their the drop in commodity prices and all other problems that start to plague the new markets. I know you seem to disagree.
Well, I mean, everyone reacts to the moment. The fact is we have a growing world population. Resources are going to be in demand again. Because you go into a down circle does not mean there will not be an up cycle. So people have to realize this. We tend to judge everything on the moment, this kind of stock market 3 months into the future. But this is not the way the world works. If you look at history, all right, the fact is that people will need these commodities. Agriculture issues as populations begin to arise again, larger middle classes. These are all going to push the commodity cycle in the future. So the idea that the G20 is dead, the G7 is, it's nonsense. I think we need to have new metrics.
What do you think of the future of G7? Will it be a moribund process?
Based on the declining of a proportion of the G7 in the global economy, the influences of G7, the effects of G7 policy coordination will continue to decline. And with the trend of a multipolar development, none of the single mechanism, multilateral mechanism, including G20, can dominate the major trend of economic policy in the world. So we need multiple cooperation among multiple mechanisms. But obviously, I'm sure G20 will take a leading role, more important than G7.
Of course, G7 is better. Whatever its future is better than the use of A-bombs in the next round of possible hostilities. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.